Last night I had the opportunity to have dinner with a very engaging lady. She's a celebrity chef, a television host, a best-selling author, mom of 4. She's a go-to expert on affordable and healthy family home cooking. With an MBA from Georgetown University, she enjoyed a successful career in corporate finance and strategy before becoming a stay-at-home mom. Melissa D'Arabian is passionate about sharing her tried and true recipes and money-saving tactics. She competed on and won Season 5 of Food Network, the Food Network star. She soon became known for her popular Food Network show and the New York Times best-selling cookbooks. A sought-after expert regularly featured in national media, she shares her diverse life experiences and wide-ranging expertise on topics from food and cooking to business and leadership. Today, she joins us to discuss a cause close to her heart, whether speaking to Congress in Washington, D.C., or at events for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Melissa seeks to raise the volume on a national conversation about suicide. Speaking from personal experiences, having lost her mother to suicide while she was in college, Melissa shares messages of hope, helping those in need and those left behind, and what we can do to reduce stigma and prevent suicide. Please help me welcome Melissa D'Arabian.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara. Okay, let me do a couple housekeeping things, like get my water here, because I have a little bit of a cough. I'll try not to cough too loud in this, because that would be really loud for you. Thank you so much for having me. What an honor to be here. So, and thank you for that lovely introduction. And first, I want to say thank you to Eric. Eric, where are you? There. Eric, wow, wasn't he amazing? Thank you. And where's Austin? Where did Austin go? Austin, I just have to look for the hair. I love your capacity to share and to connect and to be authentic. You give me such hope that our upcoming generation is going to be able to connect and share and love in a way that wasn't so common in my generation. So thank you for coming up here and sharing. Wasn't he awesome? Yeah. Oh. What a joy to be here. I just want to have a quick little note that if you want to tweet or Instagram or whatever, please feel free to do it. And in fact, before we begin, I'm going to take a quick picture of you because well, let's face it, you're a good-looking crowd. So let's go with that. Yeah, you know, a little smile would be okay. There we go. Oh, perfect. Oh, good. Okay, and this side too. Okay, you're not left out because you're the better side, right? Just kidding. No, just kidding. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I may tweet you out too. So feel free to do that. I won't think that you're on the phone unless you pick up and start talking, in which case then I'll think you're on the phone. Most people know me from Food Network. I competed on a show called The Next Food Network Star a number of years ago, about almost 8 years ago. And I showed up at the Next Food Network Star as the only non-professional chef there. I had come from a career in finance and strategy. I worked as a consultant, and then I worked for the Walt Disney Company for a number of years in strategy and finance, which sent me over to Paris, where I worked over at Euro Disney, Disneyland Paris, and then that's where I met my husband, not at the actual theme park, but in Paris. So my husband is French, and that sneaked up on me marrying a Frenchman, but God has plans. And when I married my husband, I was 35, and we had 4 kids in 2.5 years. So we had them when I was 36, 37, and then I had twins when I was 38. So, yeah. Just a tip, you can get pregnant while you're breastfeeding. Just something to keep in the back of your mind. In case you're wondering. But you know what? What an amazing gift, because with our first daughter, we had fertility issues, and we had a potential fertility issue. Turned out not to. But for the first year, there was some question about whether we'd be able to have kids at all. So it for us was just an abundance and a joy. So I highly recommend it. In case you're wondering, if anyone's wondering, I vote for lots of kids in a short amount of time. 4 kids in diapers is a lot, but then you're done. 4 teenagers is going to be fun because they're all girls. So I'm headed into that. And you wonder why I'm here on a weekend, right? Like, you know what? Let my husband do all that this weekend. I'm just kidding. I'll be home tonight. Most people know me from Food Network, where I won Food Network Star. And when I arrived there at Food Network Star, I remember thinking, like, in my mind, like, I've watched enough. Have you guys ever seen Next Food Network Star? Like, do you know what I'm talking about? It's reality TV, but if you want to call it, documentaries, that's also okay with me. So I have people who come up to me and say, you know what, I'm so embarrassed to say this, but I actually watched your show. I'm thinking, okay, you don't have to be embarrassed in front of me. I was actually on the show. So anyway, so just so you know, you don't have to be embarrassed. You can tell me that you watched that show, and then later we can talk about The Bachelor. So. So I arrived at Food Network Star in my mind thinking, I've watched enough reality TV documentaries to know that there are characters on any good reality TV show. There's always, like the really flamboyant gay guy who's going to be super funny, but also kind of annoy some people and create division in the house. Then there's always, like the really handsome, guy who's like too cool for school. And then there's like the hot blonde who whatever. I, in my mind, I actually thought I was showing up as the hot blonde. Right, laugh along with me. And then I realized that I was 40 years old, and I had just months earlier birthed 4 children and had recently stopped breastfeeding. So, and I had like a really bad haircut. And so I showed up at Next Food Network Star, and then in walked the hot blonde. And I realized, oh, that's not my role. I get it. And I suddenly looked around and realized that I was the only one without any professional training, cooking training. And I was like the token free week that everybody knows that as long as she's still here, I'm not going to get, oh, you know what? Oh, sorry. You know what? I turned this off, but then it turned back on. Sorry. Oh, shoot. I just answered it. I'm not making it up. I answered it. Oh, sorry. Hi. You know what? I'm actually speaking in front of 600 people right now, and my phone got turned on accident. I know. I love you. Okay. Bye. No, that's a joke. That's not a joke. I mean, it is a joke. That's my mom's best friend. See, people, I know, because I don't want to spoil this for you, but my mom dies in this story. And that's my mom's best friend. Oh, goodness. Oh, what a gift. That, I promise you, was just me being lame. It's off now, I promise. Okay. Oh. Yes, it's my birthday. Yay. Oh, what a delight. Oh, it's so good to be loved. So good to connect, isn't it? So I ended up winning Food Network Star, despite being the free week. And I ended up creating a show called $10 Dinners, and then a cookbook by that same name. And then my next cookbook was Supermarket Healthy. And, all along the way, I think that it's important to know that $10 dinners and Supermarket Healthy, really anything I do with food is rooted in something deeper and more meaningful. And I love food, and I love what it can do, how it can bring us together. But what I love most about food is the meaning behind it, the fact that it's a gift from God and that it's an opportunity for us to come together and for us to connect in community, because I think community is so important. And I think that community is what's going to save us. And I think for me, food represents all of that. I grew up raised by a single mom putting herself through college. My parents got divorced when I was a couple months old. Turns out that those weekend weddings in Vegas when you're sophomore and freshman in college are actually not a good idea. So my parents got divorced when I was a couple months old, and my mom raised me by herself. And so she was still in college, and so we had very little money, and there were definitely days and weeks where we didn't have food on the table. I ended up being put on a lunch program because of a very astute receptionist at the school where I attended when I was in elementary school. There was a policy that if you forgot your lunch, that they would give you a free lunch, that they would give you like an IOU, like you would get an IOU for 45 cents, which is how much lunches cost back then. You would take that home, and then your parents would send in the 45 cents, and then they would pay it off. That was their method for dealing with people who forgot their lunches. So I quickly learned that if I didn't forget my lunch, I would get like an apple. So if I forgot my lunch, I would get like warm, breaded piece of mystery meat and vegetables and like a piece of like square Jell-O that I could pick up with my hands, which I don't feel like they do that anymore. But back then, Jell-O was like really hard, and it was like hand Jell-O. Anyway, so the receptionist at the principal's office started to recognize that I was forgetting my lunch an awful lot. And instead of yelling at me or asking for the money, because the money, I never took the IOU to my mom because I knew she couldn't pay it. And that scared me. I didn't want her to freak out. And I wanted my warm steak fingers. So I kept forgetting my lunch. And finally, the receptionist called me in and talked to the principal. And they said, you know what? We think something's going on here, and we want to put you on this lunch program. So I then started to serve lunch to the kids during like the lunchtime, and then I would get a free lunch. I would like earn that lunch, as it were. I'll never forget that woman, that receptionist in the principal's office, because she understood the power of connecting with somebody else. She understood the power of just doing something small that could change the trajectory of somebody's life. I really do believe that we can reach out to people, and in a small way, even if it's a small shift in degree, you add that to time, and the whole trajectory can change. So I do believe that receptionist is partly responsible for me being able to be a good student, because I have been hungry in a classroom and I've been not hungry in a classroom. And I will tell you, I do better when I'm not hungry. And that receptionist taught me a lesson that has always stuck with me, which is we are better together than we are apart. I believe that the healing began in that jail cell, in the community. I believe that when we share each other's stories, that we are stronger. So a lot of people think that I'm in the food business, and I'm not in the food business. I'm not even in the television business. I'm in what I call the trench buddy business. And what do I mean by that? What's a trench buddy? I think that life is beautiful and rich, and every day is truly such a gift from God. But I also think that life is hard, and I think that we have big things to overcome. We get phone calls from doctors with news that we don't want. We lose people suddenly in ways that blindside us on a Tuesday night. And life is hard because we also have small stuff like, we need to get a parking spot and we're running late, or I can't find my second shoe. That's happened. And I think through these beautiful and rich but somewhat difficult ups and downs of life, I think we want to know two things. I think ultimately we want to know that we're enough. We want to know in our gut that as we are today, we're enough. And I believe that we are. For me, that's rooted in my identity with God. But we want to know that we are enough and that we matter. And we do. You matter, we all matter. And so when it comes to thinking about mental health, we all need to know that we matter. I also think that we all want to know that we're not alone. I think there's such power in hearing the words, "What? You too?" There's such power in us connecting with one another. There's power in knowing that someone else has our back. There's power in the receptionist saying, "Let me figure out a way to get you hot lunch." And that's what I think a trench buddy is. I think a trench buddy is down there in the trenches of life with us. Our trench buddies have each other's backs. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing in life. That's what we're doing here, right? We're trench buddying up. So we're trench buddies for each other today. And we're trench buddies out there when we leave it. I'm in the trench buddy business, not in the food business. So yes, I'm on Food Network. That's my job, bless you. And I'm incredibly grateful to have it. But I'm going to take you back a few years to how I got to that place of gratitude. Back in 1989, I was a junior in college. Now, as I mentioned before, my mom was a single mom putting herself through college and then eventually medical school, and then she became a successful physician, psychiatrist. And by that point, I was in college, and I was doing well. I was a good student. I went to UVM for undergraduate and was studying and getting prepared to take my GMATs, which is the test that you need to take to get into business school. And so there we were on an April afternoon, and I needed to get from my mom, I had a very simple request for her. I needed her credit card number. So I was calling my mom, who lived in Washington, D.C. at the time. I called my mom on the phone to get money for my GMAT prep course. And I kept getting a busy signal. Now, for anybody who's under the age of 40, a busy signal is what you used to get when you would call and the person was on the line. And it sounds like this. It's like, And then, true story, I took my kids to Disneyland, and in Minnie Mouse's like little mini house, there's like this like a phone, like the old-fashioned like princess phones, you know, like with the buttons and it's a phone. It's a phone. This is not a phone. I mean, it is, but it's not, right? A phone. And my kids, I'm not kidding, said to me, "Mom, what is that?" Anyway, so I was calling my mom, and I just kept getting a busy signal all day. So I kept having to call back, because that was like even before like star 69 or whatever it was that would enable you to call, whatever. And I kept calling. And then I was on my way out the door that evening, and I thought, I'm going to try one more time. And I called, and I got through. And it was like that magical sound after you've been hearing the suddenly you hear, you're like, oh, Mom, why were you on the phone for 7 hours? And the phone rang, and suddenly someone picked up, and it was not my mom's voice, and my mom lived alone. So my first thought was, oh, that's why I misdialed. Someone picked up that was not my mom. It was not even female. It was a deep, male, gravelly voice who identified himself as a member of the Montgomery County Police Department. And we had a very short conversation, but it's one that every single word rings in my head, even now, 27 years later. And I've never shared that I've never shared that conversation. I've never even been able to write it out. My husband, I've never even shared it with my husband. But the gist of that was that my mom had died by suicide. And in that moment, my whole world changed. Not just all the stuff in my world, not just the logistics, but the very scaffolding that my world had been built upon was completely collapsed and was completely gone. And my mom's suicide hit me not only in that logistical way, and obviously the sadness and the loss, but for me, it led me on a spiritual winter. Because for me, I couldn't reconcile my mom's death with what I thought that might mean for her. And so rather than pick up the Bible and read about it, I just sort of walked away from that all spiritually. And I sort of knew that God was out there, don't get me wrong, but there would be no deep discussions about this issue and my anger at my mom leaving. And it took me years to realize she did not do this to me. That in fact, my mom was the very first victim of her own mental illness and her own depression and her own bipolar. None of which I knew about at the time. This was years of piecing it all together and finding things out and reflection and looking back. But in that moment of losing my mom, I went on this 10 years, a decade-long spiritual winter where I couldn't reconcile anything. But I learned something very important. I learned lots of things in that 10-year winter. But one of which is sometimes the only way out is through. And in that winter, all the things that proved to be meaningless to my mom, financial success, career success, climbing up the ladder, finally getting through college, finally getting through medical school, finally being recognized and successful, buying the house. My mom had just a few months before she died, bought her dream car, a Cadillac. She bought this dream car. All the things that proved to be meaningless to her, in a weird twist of irony, were the very things that I clung to in that winter. Almost as if I had decided that I was going to do it better than she had. I would glean out of those things that she had been unable to do. I would appreciate them in a way that she hadn't. So I responded to that meaninglessness, apparent meaninglessness, right? I'm not in her head or heart, by saying, okay, then I'm going to go after that even harder. And my nose went down to the grindstone. I went to business school. I studied hard. I worked hard. I climbed up the corporate ladder. I sought all those things that proved ultimately not to be enough to make her want to stay with us. That was the irony of those 10 years. My mom, though, was truly an extraordinary woman. She was funny. She was so funny, and smart and social. She was not holed up in a corner and just ticking off the days. My mom's life is not defined by how she left it. No one's life is. And yet, if I bring up Robin Williams, we all know where I'm going with that. Robin Williams. How could Robin Williams take his own life? There's an important lesson I got out of my mom leaving us too soon, which is wherever I go, I take myself with me. Wherever I go, I take myself with me. And so I remember when Robin Williams died, I remember staying up that night. Like I couldn't sleep. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. And this is still, in 20 plus years after I've thought about and internalized with mom and all of that. But still, I found myself, everyone was sharing stories on Facebook and clips, of when he won the Oscar, for Good Will Hunting. And I was watching that clip of Good Will Hunting, and I'm looking into Robin Williams' eyes. And I kept staring at the clip and thinking, I'm trying to find out in his eyes, where was the happiness? Where was the joy that would make him want to stay another day? What was missing? And yet I already knew the answer, and I found myself doing it. Because here's the thing. Happiness, capital H happiness, versus small h happiness, right? I'll make the distinction. Capital H happiness is really joy. Right? What is capital H happiness? Joy. It's the inner sense of peace that is big enough to house the difficulties that life has, because life is tough. Life is rough. That's why we need each other. That's why we're trench buddies. Life is rough, and it's devastating sometimes, and it's brutal, and we cry deeply because we care. If we didn't cry and we didn't care, then we wouldn't be able to feel the deep joys too, right? So happiness, capital H, is that deep inner joy and peace. It's not like, smile. It's the peace that enables us to weather the problems that you were talking about, Eric, the house problems, the tax problem, whatever, the financial, whatever it is, right? It's the peace in us that says you're enough, and there are things we can do if you're suffering from depression or mental illness or other mental disorders, addiction. Most people who die by suicide have a treatable mental disorder or condition. Most people. So what that means is that if we trench buddy up, we can actually save lives. So here's the thing about happiness, capital H. Capital H happiness has nothing to do with our circumstances, has nothing to do with, where we live, what we do, all of that, none of that. Capital H happiness is 100% an inside job. It is a 100% inside job, and there's good news to that, and there's bad news to that. Because the good news is, I don't need a fancy house or a fancy shiny new car to make me happy, capital H. They may make me happy small h, but happy capital H, I don't need a new car for happiness, capital H. So that means it's available to us right here and right now. We don't need the next fill in the blank thing, right? I think that we're sort of raised to believe in culture and society that there's the next big thing is gonna make it all okay. Right? And that can be anything for us. It can be like, when I get a boyfriend, when I finally get engaged, when I finally get a new car, when I get a promotion, when I get a whatever. Fill in the blank. The next big thing isn't what's going to make us, capital H, happy. So the good news is we don't need to wait one more minute. We don't need to wait to get the shiny new car to make us, capital H, happy. Here's the bad news. The bad news is that a shiny new car won't give us capital H happiness, because the outside stuff doesn't do it. It's an inside job, and it's tricky. That's why mental health and mental fitness, that's tricky stuff. I love mental fitness. I'm using that. I just did. Credit goes to Eric. That's why mental health is so tricky, because it's an inside job and it's hard to see. the next big thing isn't what is going to make us happy. And it's because that's all outside stuff. It might make us smile for a few months. Hey, listen, there's nothing wrong with enjoying the bounty and beauty that God has given us, and that's terrific. But we just can't confuse it with capital H happiness. And here's what I know. I know that my mom's success, I know that my mom's arrival, I know that my mom's big promotion that she got as a doctor, I know that all of that, for her, that was a version of the Oscar that Robin Williams got. I know that outside stuff, I suspect that outside stuff did not make her happy, capital H happy. And even someone like Robin Williams, who's a cultural icon, how could he not feel important enough to stay? Right? I kept thinking. I suspect that being a cultural icon is also outside stuff. Wherever we go, we take ourselves with us. So what does that mean? What can we do? I love that we all get united, when something like, Robin Williams dies, we get united around that front. And I will tell you, I'm thrilled because when how we treat celebrities, I think tells us how we're going to be willing to treat regular folks in, 20 years. So let's move that along, I think. I think it's great that we are talking about Robin Williams and that there are celebrities who will talk about, mental health now, and we will rally around them. I love that the way we are talking about mental health with celebrities has changed. I love the awareness that we are giving these important issues, which are typically spoken in whispers, and I mean literal whispers. When my mom died by suicide, people whispered to me that if we wanted to, we could keep the suicide note a secret, and we could delete it from her hard drive, and we can keep it a secret. Well-meaning people, not like creepy, weird people, right? Well-meaning people sort of said, listen, if you want to, yeah. That was 27 years ago. So we're in a different place today. So I am comforted by all of the Facebook posts. I'm comforted by all the tweets. I'm comforted by people coming forward and sharing their stories. But I think the next step is we need to make it not just okay for famous people to go into rehab, but we need to make it okay for Bob from accounting to go into rehab. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have been touched by suicide in some way? Either your own or family, or you've known somebody or anything. Okay, great. Now, how many of you have been touched by suicide or mental illness in some way? Okay, a lot more hands. Okay, how many of you have been touched by suicide, mental illness, or addiction, overuse of alcohol, DUIs, drug use, whether that's pill popping or any of those things? How many of you are there? Okay, so now that's most of us. See, because here's the thing, it's great that we're talking about suicide, and it's wonderful that at least we can say the word suicide in a regular voice and not in whispers. It's fantastic that we can raise the volume on this conversation that used to just be held in whispers. We need to say loudly and clearly to people, to everyone, to those who have lost from suicide and those who are suffering now in silence, that you matter and you are not alone, and we are all your trench buddies. And I will tell you something, as any of you know who have dealt with mental health and mental illness, it's a messy, yucky road sometimes. And sometimes it is filled with yuckiness, and it becomes very difficult to continue loving people through mental illness. It is hard. But people who are suffering from mental illness need to know we can do hard things, and you are worth it, and you matter. So it's going to be hard. It's going to be messy. We're going to have to roll up our sleeves. We're going to have to come together. We're going to have to share bravely. We're going to have to share courageously. We're going to have to spend some money. We're going to have to do all of these things. But guess what? When 80% of hands go up in the air, we need to be having these conversations, and we need to do it. We can do hard things. And you are worth it. Robin Williams is worth it, not because he's a cultural icon, but because he's a father and he's a man. He's one of us. He's in our trenches. Bob from accounting is also in our trenches. We need to not just talk about suicide, the act, and then the support afterward. Absolutely, that's important. But suicide is one piece of the whole continuum, right? There's the addiction, there are mental disorders and illnesses. A lot of this is treatable. These are all factors that lead up into suicide. Not all suicides, but most of them. Most of them, yes. And then there's, right before the suicide, there's the accessibility issue. That's where we need to talk about things like, bridge protection. I live next door to one of the most suicidal bridges in the United States, the Coronado Bay Bridge over in San Diego. So we need to address suicide not just from the suicide event perspective, but from that entire life cycle of suicide. We need to make it okay for people to go into rehab. And in the recovery community, we need to balance the need for anonymity with the need to be talking about it. We need to make it okay for people to talk about mental illness. Just recently, someone was talking about how they didn't talk a lot about a family member's mental illness. And I related to that because I explained that, I have a family member who also has mental illness going on right now. I said, but I don't really share about it because it's not my story yet. And I heard myself say that. I heard myself say, it is not my story yet. What's the yet? Do you know what the yet is? I'll tell you what the yet is. I knew it instantly as soon as I said it, and I heard myself say it. The yet was because they're not dead yet. If I'm honest. That's what I was saying. I essentially said, I am not going to talk about my piece of that story until the person is gone. And then it's fair game. Well, guess what? We need to figure out a way to talk about mental illness and mental health, not just after people have died. Yes, once they've died, let's take the lessons learned. Let's prevent other deaths. And that's why I'm here. I'm not here because I think I'm going to save my mom. I'm here for the mom who wakes up tomorrow in that vortex of despair and sees suicide as the only way out. I'm here today for the person who this evening is going to be struggling with depression and is going to be wondering if suicide isn't the only way out. I'm here for the teenager whose YouTube video I do not want to see next week alongside a headline saying that this child was bullied and then killed him or herself. I'm here for them. So we need to figure out a way to connect and to talk about mental illness while it's happening, while it's messy, and while it's tricky. We are each other's trench buddies. I believe the healing begins when we connect. I believe the healing began in that cell card game. We belong to each other. You belong to me and I belong to you. We belong with each other and we are meant to be in community. C.S. Lewis tells this story of a group of 3 friends that he was part of. J.R. Tolkien and Charles Williams, an author. And the 3 men were close, deep friends. And then Charles unexpectedly died. And C.S. Lewis talks about how what he found out when Charles died, 1/3 of their group was gone, that he didn't get more of Ronald, J.R.R. Tolkien's first name, Ronald. He says, I didn't get more of Ronald. I actually got less of him. And why is that? Because there was a part of Ronald that only Charles brought out in him. In other words, no one is big enough to bring out everything in somebody. In other words, we cannot truly know one another fully unless we know one another in community. And that's the beauty. We know each other more in community than we know each other in isolation. So let's do that. Let's connect. Let's share. Let's be brave. We can do this. We can change the conversation about mental health. We can stop suicide. And I think the time is now, and I think that we're ready. So thank you for letting me be in your trench with you today.
To our first 3 speakers, Eric, Austin, Melissa, thank you. You've done a tremendous job. Thank you. As we take a 15-minute break, bring your cards with your questions up to the right side of the podium, of the stage here. If you have not gotten your green lunch ticket, they are required to get your box lunch. This helps us with our head count of planning for next year. Go back to registration, get that lunch ticket. If you have questions on anything else, you need to catch one of us during the break, let us know. Take the break. Think through the phenomenal speakers that we've had so far and get ready for another dynamic speaker after the break. We'll see you in 15 minutes.